here today to hear about the Holocaust is that the hatred which led to the mass murder of European Jewry did not end in 1945. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism has continued to plague the Jewish community since. Most recently, we saw the manifestation of this hatred on Holocaust Memorial Day this past Friday, when 7 worshippers were murdered at a Jerusalem synagogue. We tried to learn about the horrors of the past with an eye towards not repeating them, plotting a course toward a more peaceful and accepting world. But if we believe deeply in the value of human life, we do not need to have any outcome in mind when we remember the Holocaust. We remember to mark that which we lost. In her strength and vitality, Janine, who survived by the smallest of chance, is a living testimony to all those that were lost. The format for tonight is that Janine will tell a story for around 45 minutes, at which point those people that need to leave will have the opportunity to do so, and then we'll have a short Q&A. We have Mark here from the National Holocaust Centre, so thank you, Mark, for connecting us to Janine, and he'll also be around in the Q&A in case there are any questions pertaining to the relevance of the Holocaust to current times, because that's what he specialises in. But I'm going to leave it to Mark now to give Janine a short introduction.
Thank you so much, Jojo. Thank you to everyone for being here today, and thank you particularly to the University and the Jewish Society for partnering with us, and particularly for inviting this fantastic lady. The very fact that you've come out tonight suggests that you know something of the Holocaust. The theme for this year's Holocaust Memorial Day just passed was ordinary people, and I think it's a particularly apposite one, because contrary to the belief of many people when they first start learning about the Holocaust was not something that was perpetuated or perpetrated by one person, by a few people, by one nationality. It was perpetrated by 22 different European countries. It had ordinary victims from 22 different European countries, but it had ordinary perpetrators from 22 different European countries, and ordinary bystanders from 22 different European countries who, through indifference, all through agreeing with it, stood there and did nothing as this genocide raged around them. So the testimony that you're going to hear tonight is an extraordinary story in one sense, but unfortunately all too ordinary in so many other senses. But I would ask you to listen to it, whether it's the first time you've heard a Holocaust survivor speak, or it's the 10th or 20th, however many times you've heard, the story has relevance beyond the testimony itself. It's got real moral clarity to it, because it is an ordinary story of extraordinary survival perpetrated within the bounds of what was unfortunately a very, very ordinary genocide. So I hope it sounds strange, given what we're about to hear, that you enjoy the testimony, but I hope you do. Janine is an amazing lady. She, I think, in the last couple of weeks has done this over 20 times maybe. I've done it with Janine in the last week. I've listened to this testimony 4 times now. It never goes away, the incredible feeling of it. So I hope you enjoy it. Please do have questions afterwards. It is a fantastic honour again to introduce Janine Webber.
Everyone. So I will be speaking for about 45 minutes and show you some pictures, and I welcome questions. Any question you can ask me, whatever you want to, and I'll try and give you an honest as possible, give you a good answer if it's possible. I was born in eastern Poland in 1932. Who can guess how old I am? Shall I help you? Well, I think I am just over 90. Not yet 90. you the map of Poland as it was before the war, before 1939, when the war started. And this is the map of Poland, and the black spot, Lvov, was the town where I was born. It was Poland. It's not anymore Poland, that town. It's Ukraine. And you might have heard people on the radio, television, that it was shell bombarded. It's called in Ukrainian Lviv, but I always call it Lvov. Lvov is a very beautiful town, a very cultural town. It has an opera house, very much like the one in Paris. It has universities, theaters. In Lvov, before the war, there were 3 communities, almost equally divided. There was the Polish Catholic community, Ukrainian community, also Christians, but Orthodox Christians, and there was the Jewish community. And there were over 150,000 Jews who lived in Lvov. Unfortunately, most of them perished, mainly shot, but also died of hunger or disease and eventually deported. And I am one of the very few who managed to survive. You know, in Poland, 3 million people were killed. And there were about 2%, less than 2%, who managed to survive. I lived right in the center of the town with my parents, my brother 2 years younger. We lived in a 2-story building. We had a flat on the 2nd floor. I'm mentioning this because it's relevant to my story. And a very modest flat, 1 room where we all slept, a little room, a dining room, and a little kitchen. My parents, I think, what I remember, were moderately religious, because sometimes on a Saturday, my father would take me to the synagogue. Our synagogue was an Orthodox synagogue, which meant that men sat on one side, women on the other. But I was allowed to sit with my father, with the men, because I was a small child. And you know, the men made a lot of fuss of me. And I liked it. I still do. I don't get so much fuss nowadays. In 1939, you most likely have learned in history, the war started. Russia, or the Soviet Union, and Germany had a pact, and they divided Poland into 2. Western Poland became German, Eastern Poland, where we live, became Russian. And the Russians came to our town. My life under the Russians didn't really change that much, except I was sent to school because I was 7. And in Poland, most of the children go to start school when they're 7. But I was very much aware that my parents were always whispering to each other. And I asked my mother, what is going on? And my mother said, the Russians are sending to Siberia people with money and property. And of course they didn't want to be sent to Siberia. As you know, it's one of the coldest places on our planet. And we were not sent to Siberia because we didn't have a lot of money. And the small flat, I don't even know if it belonged to us or if it was rented. After the war, I regretted that we were not sent to Siberia because 50% of the people, not only Jews, Poles as well, who were sent to Siberia survived the cold weather. But my parents did not survive the German occupation. Now, my family, I will just show you some photos. This is first Lvov, which the photos which I took when I went with my late husband about 12, 13 years ago. And this is the first photo I wanted to show you of my family. My mother, I think we are somewhere in a village near Lvov on holiday. You know, in those days people didn't travel far, but they still had once a year a little holiday where they went to a village. My mother is lying on the grass wearing a swimming costume, so I suppose we are near a river. There is no river involved. My uncle, her brother, is lying on the deck chair. I don't know why he's wearing pajamas, seems very odd. Behind him is my auntie. Now, she was about 14 on that photo. She played a very important part in my life, so I will mention her again. I will give you some details about her. And there are 3 sweet girls. One of them, it's me. Can anybody guess which one? Come on, be daring. Sorry? The middle, you are right. Am I still so sweet? Well, not sure, but obviously I was about, I think maybe 4 or 5, always smiling. I think I most likely was a very happy child. The baby in the pram is my cousin Nina. She was about 10 months old on that photo. She and her parents and her brother, they lived on the first floor of that building. And the other girl, she's just the daughter of some friends. My uncle got married perhaps a year later and had a baby and a wife, and they were killed. Now, this is a photo of my father, and you see that's the way men dressed, very much like now, except they always carried a stick, not because they needed it, it was supposed to be elegant, and also a hat. Women too wore a hat. You see, these photos I'm showing are very old. Obviously, it's before the war. And this is a photo which I like very much. It shows my mother holding my brother's hand. He is about 2, and I'm sitting and holding on to her. And I think I'm about 4. You know, I remember this dress my mother used to wear. It was yellow, very pale yellow, and I always thought as a small child that my mother was very elegant and very beautiful. But you would agree that most of the children think so, small children think so of their mother. 1941, the Germans decided to forget about the pact with Russia, and they started moving eastwards to occupy, to take over Russia, the Soviet Union as it was called in those days. And they came to our town. Now, the Ukrainians didn't like the Jews, and I'm really sad to have to tell you this because of what's going on nowadays. But at that time, they were persecuting the Jews. and some of them killed 4,000 Jews as soon as the Germans arrived, even before the Nazis started killing them. And when they saw, and if they saw a young woman in the streets who looked vaguely Jewish, they would force her to get undressed. And you see, this photo shows the mother is trying to protect her daughter. In this photo, they kicked a Jew. They knew he was Jewish because he had a beard. The Poles, Ukrainians, and Germans didn't have a beard in those days. They kicked him, he fell to the ground, and on my right you can see the German officer. Next to him, the Ukrainian soldier. A lot of Ukrainians collaborated with the Germans and in fact joined the German army to their love. And they're all laughing, seeing this man on the ground. Very soon the Germans started rounding up the Jewish men. And one day, when my mother, my brother and I, we were in our flat, I heard the Nazis, the Gestapo, I don't know if you know that word, the Gestapo was the German police, armed police in charge of hunting down, of killing the Jews, of persecuting them. The Gestapo on our staircase screaming, calling the Jews by very unpleasant names. My father came running in and he said, the Germans after me. And my mother locked the door and my father, in order to escape, to hide, he jumped from our second floor balcony onto the first floor balcony and hid underneath. I took this photo when I went to Lvov with my late husband. The Gestapo started banging at our door. My mother had to let them in. They didn't find my father and they left. When they left, I asked my mother, why do they want my father? And my mother said, it's because we are Jewish. And you know, I never thought of myself who I was. One doesn't, as a child, one doesn't ask oneself those questions. Or at least at that time, I used to play in the streets with other children, as in those days we did. And I became very frightened. 2 hours later, my father came back. He was still alive, but he had broken his leg. We were told to leave our flat, to take a minimum, to take a suitcase. We were given a room in a small house for my parents, my brother and myself. My grandmother, who used to take care of me because both my parents worked, came with us and she slept in the corridor. My cousin Nina and her brother and her parents, they too were thrown out of their flat and they were given a room in that little house because the ghetto was not yet ready. You know, in Poland, every town had a ghetto, usually surrounded by a fence or a wall where they would force all the Jews to go to, where the conditions became atrocious. I will tell you a little more about the ghetto in a minute. So that's why they forced us to leave. They wanted to take over the Jewish property and belongings. We were there, now I will give you a few more details about my auntie. My aunt was the 10th child, and when my grandmother had her, she became very ill, and nobody took very much notice of my aunt. And in fact, she became a bit of a rebel. She rejected all our traditions and did what she wanted. And people were very critical of her. But my mother liked her for some reason. And what happened in 1941? She got herself a boyfriend. Now, you know, in those days, a girl of 17 didn't have a boyfriend. And it was shocking to everyone, and they were all critical of her. But her boyfriend, who was Jewish, spoke German, and he had a contact among the German soldiers who would warn him if there was going to be a raid. So after a few days in that house, she came and she said, hide, because they will be coming and they're taking away people. So my parents dug a hole under the wardrobe, which was in our room. And when we heard the Gestapo coming, my mother, my brother and I were hid in that hole under the wardrobe. But there was no room for my father and my grandmother, and they hid in the attic of that house. My cousin Nina and her mother, they hid in the wardrobe in their room. Her father and her brother, who was about 12, hid in the attic. The Gestapo found them hiding in the attic. I don't know what they did to my grandmother. I remember her screaming. Maybe they threw her down the ladder. They were very cruel. They took them away. They didn't find us. And they left, and when it was quiet, we came out. And very soon I asked my mother, what happened to my father and my grandmother? And my mother said, they were shot. Nina's father and her brother were shot. Nina and her mother were not found this time. You know, they were shooting the Jews before even they started deporting them. Most of the Jews who perished were shot because they stopped doing it, because they felt that the German soldiers found it difficult to shoot children. So they invented the gas chambers, and there was a camp in Lvov as well, and in eastern Poland there were 2 camps. And there were death camps actually, where they would just send them to be gassed. So what happened then after was that my auntie came again and she said, hide, because they're coming. So this time we hid in kennels, which was in the courtyard, a little sort of shed for dogs. I was sitting holding on to my mother. My brother was holding on to her. My cousin Nina and her mother came. And you know, I remember looking through the wooden slats and seeing the Gestapo approaching. And you know, I was so frightened that I didn't look at their faces. I just looked at their boots. They always had these black shiny boots. And for years I used to have this nightmare that the boots were coming to get me. Fortunately, I don't have this nightmare now. They didn't find us and they left. Very soon we were told to move to the ghetto. they gave me a small room for my mother, my brother and myself. My mother very soon became ill. And it was very dangerous to be ill in the ghetto. Because, you know, people were dying. There were children, corpses of people, of children lying on the pavement. Occasionally they would come and pick up the corpses. And if they saw somebody who was ill, they would take them away and just throw them on top of the corpses, even if they were still alive. And that's what happened to Nina's mother. Her mother caught typhus. You know, typhus is a disease which can be treated. But we had no medication. It's a disease of poverty, of lack of hygiene. A lot of people died of typhus. So they got her mother, they took her away, threw her on top of the corpses. She was still alive. My cousin Nina saw it when it happened. She was about 5. So when my mother became ill, my uncle, in order to protect her, to hide her, carried her into the cellar of that building. I went down to see her. The conditions were absolutely awful. There was water running down the walls. There were rats running around. My mother, she was lying on this narrow bed. She didn't look at me. She looked at the distance. She didn't talk to me. I couldn't understand why, because my mother had always been very loving, and I became so upset and so frightened by this situation that I ran out. I found my uncle and I told him what had happened. My uncle said that she had died. She died of typhus. I don't know if she was already dead or not when I saw her. The people who knew her said Mazel Tov, which is a Yiddish word, which means good luck to her. She doesn't have to suffer anymore. And I was left with my brother. My auntie said to me, get out of the ghetto if you can, because they are killing people. I noticed that somebody had dug a hole under the fence. And one morning, my brother and I, we crawled through the hole into the area where there were no Jews, which was safe. We walked all day, but we didn't know what to do, where to go to, who to speak to. So in the evening, we decided to go back to the ghetto. When we approached the hole, there was a group of Polish children, and they said to us, give us your coats, if not we will call the Germans. And you know, it was winter, and in eastern Poland, the winters are very bad. We gave them our coats, and they let us crawl back into the ghetto. Now let me give you some more details about the ghetto. this is the first photo of the ghetto, the very beginning. I didn't take this photo, obviously. It was this photo, and there were many photos taken by the Germans. All the really terrible photos, they seem to enjoy taking even more terrible photos. But this one is the very beginning. You see, there is an armed soldier outside the ghetto with a rifle. They would be, if they were alone, they were outside the fence. They would only go inside if there was a group of them. Well, to take people away or to kill them. They were hanging people, leaving them for days, and forcing us to go and look at them, to create terror. People, children were begging. You see this little girl, she's hoping somebody will give her a piece of bread. You see this woman, her feet are wrapped in newspapers. This little boy, you see how thin he is. Somebody has given him a piece of bread. The conditions were awful. There were so many people with disease, with, as I told you, typhus or typhoid, and dying in corpses everywhere. And always we had to think, my brother and I, where do we hide if we hear the Gestapo coming? My uncle knew a lot of Polish farmers, Polish Catholic farmers. And he found a family, farmers, to hide my auntie and me, and also families to hide my cousin Nina and my brother. He paid everyone. My auntie and I, we were hiding in the stables when one morning the farmer came. And he started sort of touching my aunt and grabbing her. And I could see she became very upset and very frightened. I didn't know what it was all about. I didn't know anything about inappropriate harassment. Excuse me. But what he wanted, actually, as you know, he wanted to rape her. So I could see she became very frightened. She begged him to let her go. And suddenly, she got up and she ran out of the stables. And I was left alone with the farmer. They locked me in a room. There was a bed and a bucket. And I was lying there. They would bring me occasionally some food. And I was getting very cold. So when they came after a few days, I asked them if they would bring me something to cover myself with. They brought me an old man's coat, and I noticed that this coat was infected with crawling head lice. And this might sound horrible to you, but I kept killing them. And I think having something to do saved my mind, because if you lie there was nowhere to sit, nobody to speak to. Week after week, months after months, you can lose your sanity. After about 3 months there, they said I have to go. They didn't want to keep me any longer. So I left and I found my way back to the ghetto. I found my uncle. My uncle found another family to hide me and to hide my brother. One morning, the daughter of the family, who was about 20, she came with an armed soldier, with what we used to call an SS. They were really cruel, those people. And I knew, when I saw him, I knew that she brought him to kill us. You know, in Poland, people were rewarded for betraying the Jews. They were given money, or sometimes food. I knew that. For some reason, which I cannot explain, he didn't want to kill me. And they killed my brother. He was 7. And they told me to start walking. I started walking, and I thought he was going to shoot me. But he didn't. And I walked and walked. And after a few hours, I became hungry. So I saw a woman in the fields. So I asked her if she would give me a piece of bread. She wanted to know who I was. I know my aunt had told me never to tell anyone that I was Jewish. So I invented a story. It wasn't too difficult, because I told you the Ukrainians didn't like the Jews, but they didn't get on well with the Poles in those days. And in fact, I believe that they killed some of them. So I said, I'm a Catholic, and Ukrainians killed my family. And she believed me, and she said I can come and help her in the house. But after a few months, she said she found out that I was Jewish. She couldn't keep me any longer. I have to go. She bought me a train ticket, and I went back to Lvov. I had with me the name and address of a young Polish man. He was 19. He was called Edek, or Edek, as we pronounce it. I think I've got the photo. There he is. He was 19. He was a night watchman of a convent. And when the war started, he told my family, if you ever need some help, find me and I will help you. So I found him. He was in his office, he got up, and he told me to walk behind him at the distance. He was afraid to be seen with a Jewish girl. He took me to a small building, put a ladder against the wall, and told me to climb the ladder. When I opened the door to the loft, I saw my auntie, my uncle, my auntie's boyfriend, 13 Jews. Edek was hiding 13 Jews, and I was the 14th. He is a hero. He really risked his life. He would have been shot immediately. We were there in that attic, but that night they would go down, they dug a hole under the stables floor, and one night we all went down that hole. It was, I suppose, quite well organized. There were 6 planks and chairs, and a bulb hanging from the ceiling, lit day and night, and a bucket. But we had to take it in turn to lie on the plank or sit on the chair. It was very small, so it was impossible to move, really. And also, as it's very hot living on the ground. and I remember just wearing my underwear. We had very little food. My auntie would go out at night. She would buy some food the next day and come back the following night. And I remember eating slices of dry bread with chopped up raw onions, and I thought it was delicious. I stayed in that hall for nearly a year. My aunt and uncle said to me, it's too difficult for a child to live in a home. And one night, my auntie and I, we left the home. She managed to get me some false papers, and I got a very nice Polish name, Nina Kopielska. If anybody comes from Poland, it sounds very Polish. My auntie took me to a Polish committee which was formed to help the Poles because they too suffered during the war. When the woman in that office saw me, she said to my aunt, "This girl looks Jewish. Are you sure she's not Jewish?" Well, I'm not surprised. You know, I could hardly walk. I was dragging my legs because I hadn't used my leg muscles for nearly a year. And also I was very thin because of the lack of food. I don't know how my face looked. I don't know how one looks living on the ground without daylight and fresh air. Nobody suspected my aunt because she was blonde. And in Poland, people believed that all the Jews were very dark. In my family, quite a few were blonde. But my aunt was a very articulate and very strong woman. And she convinced her that I wasn't Jewish, that I was a Catholic. So she gave me a letter and I went to a convent. They took me in for the night, but the next morning, the woman in charge, the Mother Superior, she's called, said to me they couldn't keep me any longer because I was starting very ill and they didn't want the other people to catch my disease. So they bought me a bus ticket and they say, go to Krakow. So I went to Krakow. Found an orphanage. They run by nuns again for the Polish children. But Catholic nuns pray several times a day, and I didn't know the Catholic prayers. So I was worried they might find out. I used to move my lips just to pretend that I was praying. Also, I could hardly walk, so I asked the Mother Superior, how is it that other children can run and I find it difficult? And she said to me, and I still remember this, she said, you have to accept that you will never walk normally. Well, she was wrong. I am a good walker. So, I wasn't very happy there. So one day, when an elderly priest arrived, and he said he had a little house in the garden, and he could take 4 girls, I asked him if he would take me. And indeed, I would sit in his garden, walk around the bushes, and little by little, I recovered my leg muscles. He was a very kind man, but what I didn't like, we slept in bunk beds. I slept in the lower bed. The girl on top would wet her bed, and I was always worried they might run on me, but I never wanted to complain because he was such a kind man, and also he looked to me so old. So one day when a elderly couple arrived and they said they would like a girl to help them in the house, I asked them if they would take me. And that is how, at 11 and a half, I became a maid. I worked for them They hired me out to work for another family. Of course, they didn't know I was Jewish, so they sent me to church. And you know, Catholic children have to go to confession and be prepared for the communion. The confession worried me because I didn't know what sin I had committed. Because by then I thought I must have become a Catholic because I go to church every Sunday. Anyway, I did my communion and I have a photo. Here it is in my communion dress. When I arrived in that village, I wrote to Edith, but nobody replied, so I thought everybody was dead. But 6 months after the war, my auntie came, and that's her. And this is about 30 years ago. And she took me to Krakow, put me in a children's home for Jewish children who survived with false papers or like hiding. And we lived in Zakopane, which is a widow's. But you know, after the war in Poland, there was still a lot of anti-Semitism. And people who went back to their houses and flats, who wanted to live there quite often, they were shot, they were killed by the Poles. And this is well documented. So, and when we lived, people knowing that we were Jewish, they would throw stones at us. So one day, people in charge decided to leave. And this is the coach we took. It was illegal actually to leave. We went to Paris. When we arrived in Paris, Nina was us and my auntie, and when we arrived, my auntie asked Nina and me, what do you want to do? They are taking the children to Israel. Do you want to go with them? Or do you want to stay in Paris? Because she wanted to go to the French University in La Sorbonne. We both said we wanted to be where she was. Well, my auntie didn't have any money. She was still young, so she put us in the children's home for Jewish French children who survived. You still know that France too was occupied by Germany and a lot of Jews perished. I went to school, my education is French, my language is French and English as well. When I was 24, I came to England just for 3 or 4 months to improve my English. I met an Englishman. Can you guess the rest? I have 2 sons and 2 grandsons. And I love them very much. I try to teach them to be tolerant, to be kind to people, and to be, to stand up to any persecution, any bullying. Thank you very much.
Due to procedural difficulties, we're only going to take questions sort of from this area, the middle area, because it's difficult to access the top and the sides, unfortunately. But if anyone has any questions, Alex and Fran are going to go around with the mics, and you can put your hand up and ask a question. Questions can be directed to Janine about her story, and any other questions you think might pertain to her. And also, Mark has a lot of knowledge on sort of how to relate the Holocaust to current times, so if you have any of those questions, you can address them to Mark. Anyway, anyone want to start? Yeah.
Thank you for your testimony. I work with secondary school students, and testimony, Janine. I work with secondary school students. I was a high school English teacher in the US, and my doctoral research is on the teaching of literature. I'm just wondering, what is one thing you wish young people knew about the Holocaust?
Sorry, it's 1 second.
One thing
About the Holocaust.
that you would want young people to know.
Oh, that I would want you. Well, I mean, I speak because one reason, I mean, this is one reason, so that they don't forget, that people don't forget about what happened. Because, you know, forgetting is dismissing and not paying attention, is accepting in a way. So that's one reason, or there are other reasons why I speak. If you want to know, I can tell you. Well, for me it's very important to speak about my family, because there are very few people who survived the Holocaust and nobody would know what happened. For instance, very few people know that there was an uprising in the ghetto towards the end, that people, young people, they knew they were going to be killed, they knew, like in Warsaw, but they still tried to fight. And for me it's very important, because I want people to realize that we have to be humane, we have to be kind to other people, to accept. Because if we let a handful of people who are, as we say, ordinary, but can do a lot of harm, you know, where will it go, our civilization, our world? We have to stop them killing innocent people. We have to stand up to it, to hate.
Just very quickly, the National Holocaust Museum, we have about 50,000 students, young people come through every year. I'm also an ex-English teacher, so I feel your pain. And I would say one of the things that we come up against, particularly as English teachers, particularly in secondary schools, is literature that fosters a false view of the historical narrative. I think if you ask children in this country, what one book do you associate with the Holocaust, they would say Anne Frank's diary, and that's good. If you ask them for a second, it would be The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, mostly because they've never actually read it, they've seen the film. And the problem with that, I mean, I could go on for hours and hours, the problem with that film and book, but I think the real difficulty of that and literature like it is that it tries to push us to see the good in bad people, to kind of think actually we're all ordinary, we're all the same, we're all at some level good, when actually the real difficult message I think that comes through in space from Janine's testimony is not necessarily that we're all good, but at the risk of sounding a little bit like a Catholic social thought dog myself, that we're all actually potentially bad, and that in that situation we could all do this. And I think that is the message of Holocaust education, not to look for the good in bad people, but to actually look for the bad in good people. And how can we deal with that? How can we manage it? How can we prevent it from ending in this? Thank you.
Okay, Alex, I think someone has a question over there.
Hi Janine, thank you so much for your testimony. I was just wondering what happened to Edek. Did you see him after the war?
Edek?
Yes.
What happened? Oh, I'm glad you asked about him. Now, after the war, you see, I was in Western Poland. I didn't see him. I didn't go back to Lvov. The war carried on for another year, actually, and they stayed in that hall. And when the war finished, they came out and they thanked him. He was actually caught by the Germans, but they didn't have time to kill him because they were fleeing. It was the end of the war. And he never betrayed the Jews. So I wanted to thank him a few years later, and I asked BBC to help me to find him. They took 6 months, but they came and they said, no, we couldn't find him. And Later, a friend of mine, Mark Cave, who is actually in charge of Bachelor, he said he will help me to find him. And what happened was that Edek was undercover name. He was in the Polish resistance. His real name was Franciszek, not very different. I didn't know this. So of course, they couldn't find him. He went after, when the Russians came, he went to Krakow to study. And I'm told that he became an accountant, but unfortunately he died. He was quite young. I think he was about 27. So I never managed to thank him. But in Israel, in Jerusalem, there is a place called Yad Vashem, where they have all the names of people who helped or saved the Jews. And his name is there. So I'm glad to know that he was actually celebrated by the Israelis for being someone who saved the Jews, really. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, I think Emily has a question.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing the testimony. I was just wondering what the first time sharing the story was like.
The first time. Yes, I wasn't able to speak for 50 years. And after the war, nobody wanted us to speak, actually. When I was in this children's home, all the children were survivors, and we were told never to speak about the war, never to think about it, try and forget. Well, so I wasn't able to speak. And I would cry at night, but I didn't want my children to see me crying, so I would try during the daytime, to lead a normal life. But in 1996, my sons felt that they both said, people ought to know your story. And one of my sons organized an interview through the Shoah Foundation. I don't know if you know, I think the Jewish community knows about it. It's a foundation set up by Steven Spielberg to interview all the survivors. So one of my sons knew somebody, and he got in touch with somebody who would interview me and film me. My other son also asked me to write my story, which I did as well. Well, that was the first time when I really spoke in details. Because I never wanted to mention, well, obviously my family knew, my very close friends knew, but not at work when nobody knew I was Jewish even. I was always frightened of, people might hurt me, I don't know, might start hitting me. So I never wanted to tell anybody who I was really. In 1996, I told my story in details, and I became so upset that I couldn't stop crying. So the lady who interviewed me, she said I needed help, and she got me in touch with the psychotherapist, and I had some help for a few years. And then, after about 3 years, he said, "You're ready to speak." And I joined an organization who sent me to schools and other places to speak. And my late husband, used to come with me, and that was reassuring to have him with me. And that's how it started. And then I have been speaking now for about 20 years. And I travel around, and nothing will stop me. I'm planning to carry on till I'm 100. Yes.
I was wondering how you noticed the Jewish community assembling in Europe after the war, if it received any or much support from abroad, or whether it's just entirely self sort of rebuilding.
Well, I wasn't Jewish for the home for Jewish children. And I was, at first in Paris, then Paris. And, I didn't experience towards me, any anti-Semitism. I went to school, to the local school, and, I went on holiday with other children. I didn't experience, but people, maybe they didn't know I was Jewish. I mean, I just look quite ordinary, as there is. I look quite normal, like everybody else. I could be Spanish, Italian, whatever. I was even taken once for Egyptian when I was in Egypt. And I didn't experience this. I didn't experience any anti-Semitism after the war in France, no. I didn't.
I think the question's really opposite, because one of the things that we're doing at the museum, working with people like Janine to do, is it doesn't need me to say there's been an uptick in anti-Semitism in this country over the last 5-10 years. And one of the things we're looking at is how much is that correlated with online social media. Because obviously the social media algorithm pushes society apart. And so you only see the things at the extremes. And the speed that some of those conspiracy theories, which have been around for hundreds of years, which the Nazis never invented anything in their lives, were just repurposing things that were already out there, those conspiracy theories now spread around the world at a speed that Goebbels, Hitler could have only dreamt of. So you saw the meme of the happy merchant that has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, being pushed through doors and under the kind of boundaries of schools that were doing the COVID vaccine in the last 2 years. Leaflets just saying, "Don't get your Jew jab," with that picture on. Now that is a meme that has been repurposed well before the Nazis, being used by the Nazis, being used now, but being used at warp speed. So I think it's a very, very dangerous moment, and I think I take it back to the founding of the museum. So the museum I work for is the only museum in the world about the Holocaust that was set up by non-Jewish people, and it was established by a Christian family from a religious perspective to heal the rift between Christianity and Judaism. Now it's a whole different ballpark to talk about that particular history. But I always say whenever I'm speaking at these things or do media or anything like that, I'm not Jewish. And I think the moment that we think of the Holocaust as being something that should only be thought of by the Jewish community is the moment that we're kind of accepting that another one will happen. And it actually should not be incumbent on the community that was the victim of the Holocaust to be the people who keep the memory alive and that keep teaching about it. It has to be incumbent on everyone, because if it isn't, it will happen again. And it will happen like that because of social media.
Any more questions? Yeah, I think we can get to the middle section. Thanks, Fran.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. I was just wondering how you found your relationship with religion change after the war, because obviously, like you said, it was so frightening to other people that you were Jewish afterwards. I wonder how through your life that's changed your religion, and your relationship with your religion.
So the question was how your relationship with religion has changed.
Yes. Well, I'm Jewish. And I will remain Jewish. And I'm very proud of being Jewish. Unfortunately, I've lost my faith. And I think maybe it happened when I was in the ghetto and so many children were dying, and my brother So maybe that's, and in the ghetto, we always thought where to hide, not to be caught, not to be killed. We also, there was very little food, so we were thinking, where do we find something to eat? That was our thoughts, not prayers. No, we just didn't, well, not my family, not the people I knew. Maybe some other people did. So, yes, so I belong to a synagogue, yes. And I like the rabbi of my synagogue. She's a lady, a young, beautiful lady. I really like her. And, but, you know, that's how I feel.
Thank you. Anyone else in that middle section? Okay, great.
Thank you. Janine, firstly, there are no words. Deeply appreciate your bravery and your willingness to share time with us today. My question is actually about your kids. Is their name meaningful to you? What are they like?
The question is about your children. What are they like? Aren't they?
What do they like? Like, what do you mean? Well, they are normal human beings. They're very good people, actually. They're very good. Very good to me. Very helpful. And they're a bit like me, really. They have no religion. But they have good values. They're very good. And I'm very proud of them. And I love them very much. And we get on well. And my grandchildren too. So there are a lot of boys and men in my family. They're very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Janine. Thank you again so much for sharing your story. Dziękuję z całego serca. I would like to ask about your aunt. Could we know a little bit more about what happened to her?
Oh, thank you very much asking about her. She was an extraordinary person, always eccentric. She lived till 95. She died in 2019. She lived in France, and I used to go, I still do, now I've got my cousin, Nina, who lives in Paris, but I used to go, she eventually moved to the seaside, and I used to go and see her every 2 or 3 months. And she was an incredible woman, very courageous. And she suffered, but she found it very difficult to talk about it. So we never talked about the war. And I found it difficult to talk with her. But I always admired her, and she did have a lot of influence on me. She went to university, yes. She got a degree in psychology, actually. And she managed quite well, and I used to see her a lot. I miss her a lot, yes. Thank you for asking me this question.
Hi, thank you so much for coming and speaking. I wanted to say really quickly that the story of Edek and how he was harboring so many Jews and putting his life at risk was really, really inspiring to me. And I think it shows us all how we can, stand up for injustices even when it's really risky to us in today's day and age as well. My question to you is about, the fact that we still have a lot of injustices that happen in the world today. We were just hearing about what happened in Jerusalem very recently. There's lots of gun violence in the U.S., for example, where I come from. How do you kind of cope with that? How do you feel about that, given that what happened in the Holocaust was so long ago? The shadows of that are still existing today. How does that make you feel, and how do you kind of cope with it?
question referred to. Is this working? Yeah, this is working. Okay. The question referred to on Friday night, there was a massacre in a synagogue in Jerusalem, but it was sort of surrounding how you feel about sort of what's going on in the world.
Well, yes. Well, it's, it's very sad. I feel sad when people fight, when people kill each other. And I feel sad what's going on in the world, what's going on in Ukraine. When innocent people kill each other, I want people to live in peace, to talk to each other, to not to hate each other. And that's my feeling. Thank you for asking this question.
I'm also going to let Mark reflect on sort of using the Holocaust as a tool to think about these kind of things.
Thank you, Alan. It's a great question. I can talk for hours and hours about the chosen subject here. I think the danger of the Holocaust as a tool for education, so learning through the Holocaust rather than learning about the Holocaust, is that it's almost being repurposed to be a multifaceted tool for everything that's going wrong with the world at any point. And actually, and we feel certainly, and people disagree with this, but we feel at the museum that if your message from the Holocaust is boiled down to something really quite banal and trite, like be nice to each other, don't bully each other, stand up, whatever that means, well actually you're probably not really learning the messages of the Holocaust, and actually you have to be a little bit harder-edged about it. I referred earlier to the idea about the kind of badness in good people. I think there's something there about that. I also think that it has to be boiled down to, at whatever level of society we're talking about, be it the family, be it the community, the school, the town, the country, if you are allowing conglomerations of power to develop, which at the same time others, a group, are normally quite a small group, then it's not saying that the Holocaust teaches you that will end in genocide, but if you do have othering plus power, then you do end up in the kind of place that caused the Holocaust. So things like, I take it back to social media, there is a clear site of power there, which is to be state power. And that is a clear site of power that is othering other people. So my phone is there, but I have plenty of examples on there of people whose Twitter handles would suggest that they see themselves as being good people. They're standing up for a lot of good causes, good in inverted commas, but they are at the same time very, very willing to say things about Jewish people that they would not say about other people. And I think it's that kind of message, that really quite hard-nosed message from the Holocaust, that we've got to take forward if we're not to just reduce the message from the Holocaust to something really quite trite that nobody can really disagree with, but no one can really action.
I think we'll have 2 more questions. I think Paul has a question.
Hi Janine, thank you very much for sharing your testimony with us. I was wondering if you've ever spoken in Israel and in places like Hashem, where people maybe know survivors intimately, personally, or have heard testimony before, and how different that is to speaking here in the UK.
The question, I think, is how is it different when you speak to people who have intimate experiences of the Holocaust, who are related to survivors, to speaking, for example, in a university setting?
Well, I have friends who are survivors. I don't especially speak to survivors. They have their own story. Although we meet quite a lot, and we see each other, and my friends I meet, but we don't speak about the war. But maybe the question could be, how does it feel speaking to the Jewish people? For instance, to go to a synagogue, which I have been invited by quite a few synagogues to speak. And they, like everybody else, they will listen with interest, and they get upset. And but some of them, the children, I spoke also in a school for Jewish children who, well, they know a little, but they don't know that much. People all the people react in the same way. They are interested, they get upset, they want to know more details. Yes. In Yad Vashem, I've been to Yad Vashem. They have got my family, and there is Yad Vashem also. They have a special room where there are all the children, the pictures of the children, and I gave them the photo of my brother. And they have all the names of my family, yes, who perished.
Hashem is a museum in Jerusalem, the largest Holocaust museum in the world. Anyone else with another question?
Hi. Amongst the many harrowing, pivotal moments you described a moment when you and your young brother were betrayed. An SS guard came to, I think you were saying, to murder you. You thought you would be murdered, but he killed your brother, you were saying. Why do you think he spared you?
I don't know why he let me go. Maybe he had a sister or a daughter, like my age, or maybe he thought a girl is less dangerous than a boy. I don't know exactly. I thought, because they didn't hesitate to kill girls and boys. So why he did it, I don't know. I cannot imagine why. And to kill my brother, the Polish family helped him to kill him. Yes. To kill a 7-year-old child, how can you forgive that? And I'm sure he didn't know what was going on. He was like he couldn't understand all this question with Jewish people being killed.
It's not until 7:30, so I think I have one final question. Anyone else? Yeah. Okay, great.
Hi, thank you for coming to talk with us. I was wondering, did you know any French before you went to France? Because that's a big adjustment if you weren't familiar with the language.
No, I didn't know. That's a good question. I didn't know any French, but I had to speak in French because nobody spoke Polish. And I always liked reading. So I remember picking up these very magazines which in those days there were these sentimental magazines with a lot of pictures, bubbles, and and the secretary marrying her boss and all this stupid things which, in 19, when I came to France, that was by then in 1946, yes, but it was so easy. It helped me to learn very quickly. I learned French and I was sent to school. And so, yes, I have been using it since then. Unfortunately, for those who speak Polish, I don't speak Polish anymore. I have forgotten it. I don't know whether I wanted to forget or it just, I don't know. Maybe subconsciously I just wanted to forget because it was such a hard time. And so, yes, I speak French. I'm fluent in French. I read in French. So, yes, I love the French language and the English language as well. Thank you for that question.
I think we should all just take a moment to thank Janine at the end of the story.